So welcome to the SIYYUM for Masekhet Pesahim. This year, the SIYYUM that allows us to break the Tana Bechorot, this Pesach 5781. You should all now see the screen with a selection from Pesahim 108, yes? I can see a few of you in the boxes, but not all of you. All right, thank you very much. So, when we explore Masekhet Pesahim, we could get embroiled in the details of the Paschal offering, many chapters, but we're going to take from the last chapter of the Masekhet, chapter Arvei Pesachim, the days right before Pesach and Seder, and then all kinds of laws concerning the Seder and traditions that we have regarding it. And what we'll tease out are many Jewish values that come to light. Needs of the poor, the idea that we embrace a thoughtful Seder vis-a-vis freedom, that we have practices that allow us to move into Jewish history and taste the bitter and the sweet, that we make an intellectual inquiry of all of our ritual practices is important to the sages and an important part of our tradition that comes out and is expressed in the Talmudic passages themselves. And we see the importance of Lador Vador, Jewish multi-generational thinking and a commitment to the ongoing story of the Jewish people, and vis-a-vis the rituals that they are based in the home and that they are an important part of family life including men, women, and children. To make a SIYYUM on Pesachim is to focus us entirely on a purposeful Pesach just around the corner. And so it worked out this year in the cycle of Daf Yomi, of studying the daily page of Talmud, that Pesachim was indeed the tractate that we were learning just up to this time. On 108 in the Gemara, we learned in the Mishnah that even the poorest of Jews should not eat until he reclines. This idea of haseva, of reclining at our seders, is foundational to the expression of freedom that the rabbis understood. It was part of a symposium, a Roman banquet, to lean and recline on chairs that were a little bit more like chaises than chairs at our dining room tables. Could have been the reason why, just from a sociological level, but the reality is we are to find an expression of freedom in our physical beings when we drink the 4 cups of wine and when we eat our Seder meals. We represent that with pillows. So if you haven't gotten your pillows yet for your Seder table and figured out where you're going to stuff it, then get your pillows set. It was stated that Amoraim, those rabbis of the Talmudic era, post-Mishnaic rabbis, discussed the requirement to recline. Everyone agrees that matzah requires reclining. So when you do the mitzvah of matzah, you recline. And everyone agrees that the bitter herbs do not require reclining. You want to taste the bitterness, that's a moment where you don't actually engage physically and lean at the Seder. With regard to wine, it was stated in the name of Rav Nachman, wine requires reclining. And it was also stated in the name of Rav Nachman that wine doesn't require reclining. So the sages can bring sometimes a limud, a position of one rabbi, where he's stated in one case it does require reclining, and in another case it doesn't. It is a Talmudic modality to say, no problem. What we mean is Rav Nachman was talking about the first 2 cups when it says you have to recline, and when it says it doesn't require, he's talking about the last 2 cups. Or the Gemara says, is it the opposite? With the first 2 cups, there's no reclining, but the second and last cups, that's when you recline. Vis-a-vis when you think the idea of freedom is implanted in the Haggadah, that's really when you lean. Gemara comes and says, since we don't know exactly which 2 cups Rav Nachman talked about when he spoke about reclining, we lean for all 4 cups. And we'll express our freedom with every cup. The poorest of Jews should be provided for, according to the first Mishnah in this chapter we're reading. They should, even if the local soup kitchen needs to be the provider, really be given all of the wine they need for the 4 cups, as it's so essential to think about in terms of the expression of freedom that we want the Seder to encapsulate. The idea of matzah being a bread of affliction and reminding us of slavery, instead of the typical reason, because they didn't have time to bake, we eat matzah, but that it's a bread of affliction is more the sense of the Gemara here when it comes to matzah. And yes, it requires reclining because ultimately we will be freed from that affliction. Now, there's an interesting connection to reclining in the very way God led the Jewish people out of Egypt. And one way you can enhance your Seder this year is to choose verses that don't necessarily appear in the Haggadah and print them out and put them on the table and have a discussion about connections that might be made linguistically. Here, the verse about Haseva, which is reclining, is linked to the verse for God leading the people round about, Vayasev. We use that root also during Hanukkah time, Sivivon. God spins us around. God spun us around the desert or the wilderness for all those years. What is the idea that the wilderness and the wandering really is connected to freedom? One could explore that question when it comes to why the rabbis thought reclining and this wandering were connected and used the verbiage from this verse to describe the reclining itself at the Seder. The four cups themselves are also Torah-based. And one could look further at the verses of Torah when it comes to the four verbs that are our base for the four cups. I've highlighted in green those four verbs. It says that God will hotseti, God will take us out of Egypt. God will vehitsalti, God will save us from slavery and Egypt. Viga'alti, God will redeem us, which sounds like it should be the last of the verbs in the progression, but in fact, God lakachti, God takes us to be a people, is the last verb in the process of God's great redemption and the redemption story of the Jewish people. Thusly, the four cups represent foundationally the idea that God does act in history, saves us from the Egyptians, redeems us even from a life of toil and terror, and then finally, lakachti, takes us as a people, gives us a gift of Torah, and makes us a unique people on the earth whose story continues. The Gemara goes on 108b to say that if you drink all four cups of wine at once, you've fulfilled your obligation to drink wine as an expression of rejoicing on the festival. While we have these seders that seem to be fixed, now that we have printed Haggadahs, and through the years, of course, the ritual has become fixed, and we wouldn't necessarily just drink 4 cups at once. The Gemara reflects a time period in which the Seder was really in formation. And the debates give us insight into the rabbis' thoughts about the symbolism of the rituals as much as they give us instruction about how to fulfill the actual elements of the Seder. And so the idea was that you could really imbibe these 4 cups of wine all at once and express the appreciation for freedom that the festival is truly centered in. Looking down a little further, we see that Shmuel also stated that if one gives his sons or the members of his household to drink from them, he has nevertheless fulfilled his obligation. So that if I have a great cup of wine or my 4 cups, and I want to fulfill the mitzvah, it seems like the rabbis at first were concerned only with the balabait, only with the one leading the Seder to actually drink the wine. Now that gets into a very pragmatic reality that wine might not have been available for everyone. Someone might not have had enough. While anyone poor was required to be provided for, we don't imagine that providing for everyone in a household would have been possible all the time. Now, Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak wants the leader to drink the majority of the cup on page 108. But this is an interesting halacha that one could give the rest of one's household to drink. And in an age where that was important, that there was a way of sharing in this mitzvah with the household, Shmuel creates such a halachic development. In fact, the sages say on that page of Gemara, 108b, all are obligated in these 4 cups. Hakol chayavin ba'arba'a kosot halalu. Those 4 cups, everyone must drink from them. Echad anashim, ve'echad nashim, ve'echad tinokot. Men, women, and children are included in the 4 cups. Now, before we get to Rabbi Yehuda's question about how children are actually involved in drinking wine at the Seder table, encouraging parents to make responsible decisions and figure out how to make Seders engaging for the children without actually sharing with them the wine that's going to put them right to sleep, or that they'll completely reject ta'am pagam. They'll think disgusting. How could you people drink such wine? We don't want to waste it on them. The idea is that there's a collective responsibility at the household. Interestingly, that collective responsibility was taken so seriously by families throughout Jewish history that a sociological look at the Seder experience would reveal to us that it was a night where more preparation by Jewish men was engaged in terms of Seder than any other, potentially any other major meal or banquet or mitzvah that we would undertake, so that men, women, and children could be at the Seder table fulfilling this obligation. Medieval manuscripts that include illuminations include many women either at the Seder table along with the men, or at separate tables of women with full Seder plates and or at least 4 cups. And though I don't want to stop the share and show you all those pieces of art, we've had lectures at Or Zarua that highlight these medieval manuscripts. We know that the 4 cups were so serious an obligation to fulfill as well that in the time right after World War I, we have experienced the question, or we were asked a question, what if there's no wine available? This is a picture of a Haggadah, which I think you're seeing now, that tells the story of the great Soloveitchik family in Europe. And the commentary down below describes a time when 4 cups of wine were very hard to come by, at least for every member of the household. The Perush, the commentary, says as follows: B'shanot haza'am shel milchemet ha'umot harishona, during the time of the great blitzes of the First World War, lo haya maspik yayin litoshvei ha'ir ha-Soloveitchik. There was not enough wine for those in the city of the Soloveitchik family. Sheyishtu kol ha-nisubim arba kosot shel yayin. All those who were in attendance at Seders, who were leaning to experience freedom, could not drink 4 cups of wine. But, chomer ha-medina haya maspik. There was enough kosher for Pesach vodka. V'danu b'zeh hagram shehaya rabba shel ha'ir. This is another Soloveitchik member of the family. Yachad im achiv hagriz. The Soloveitchik Rabbanim who were making decisions at the time for those enjoying Passover. Shehe'az v'veito. Ma ya'asu shar ha'misubim. What would the rest of the people at the Seder do to fulfill their obligation, shelo haya lahem yayin, when there was no wine for them to drink? Ha'im Yoter tov sheyotziem ba'al habayit. Should the Baal Habayit himself drink the 4 cups of wine and not give any to drink to his household? Yedei chovatam b'koso. Shall he fulfill the obligation for everyone? Shehu kos yayin, that's the 1 cup of wine, like the Tosafot say? Or is it possible? Shechol echad hotzi et havero az sheyoter tov shekol echad min hamisubin yishte kos shel chamer medina. Or would it be possible that everybody in the household or at the Seder drink vodka kasher lePesach instead of wine at their Seder? De'im ein lo yayin yikach chamer medina la'arba kosot. So serious were the Jews about fulfilling 4 cups to represent freedom that they asked the question whether or not vodka could take the place of wine. And while we concentrate sometimes on wine as the symbol, whether it's white or red, many have the tradition not to use white wine for Seder, except for the 4th cup for Hallel, if they make a transition. And some just use red to symbolize the earthiness of this redemption, the blood when it comes to the plagues that we drip out a little, which is a very modern custom, by the way, to drip out wine for the depletion of our joy, whereas before it was for God's hopefully pouring out wrath on enemies of the Jewish people. So serious were Jews about wine that they definitely endeavored to get wine for everyone at the Seder, but when they didn't have it, more important was the expression of freedom and leaning as one drinks 4 cups of, in this case, kosher for Passover vodka, over the 4 verbs, over the 4 senses of redemption that are built into the fabric of the Haggadah's language, expressing the Torah in the Haggadah by including a reference to these Exodus verses that described the redemption process. So if you don't have enough wine this year and you want to use vodka, get in touch with me. We'll discuss it personally. Probably not a good idea to drink them all at once, as the Gemara suggested one might, to fulfill an obligation as well. So just a note about that. There are some good Pesach vodkas, and they're even better when they're put in the freezer. So the Gemara continues that all are required, but what do we do about the kids? They don't enjoy wine, and for sure we're not going to give them vodka. Rather, one distributes to them roasted grains and nuts on Passover. When it comes to the kids, we distribute interesting little bits of food, and roasted grains obviously are not chametz, but they are roasted a la Pesach and very carefully taken care of as not to become chametz, so that what? The children will not sleep, and they'll ask the 4 questions at the Seder night. Fills in the commentaries. They said about Rabbi Akiva that he would distribute roasted grains and nuts to children on Passover so that they would not sleep and so they would ask. It was also taught in a Braita. Rabbi Eliezer says one grabs the matzot on the nights of Passover and one should eat them very quickly. Change the way you're eating so that you can make haste and eat, so that children will ask, why are you eating so quickly? And so when you do the mitzvah of matzah, you should eat enough of it to really sit and chew and remind yourself of the serious history of affliction and slavery. And if there are kids around, maybe even to tap the child within us, we should eat matzah a little bit more quickly than usual in order to really remind ourselves that this is a different kind of meal. We are headed out of Egypt. Finally, as the Gemara has expressed the value of including women and especially the children and making special accommodations for them, that brings us to the end of the Masekhet. The end of the Masekhet is a measure for measure midah shel chesed of God, God's through God's kindness of redemption, the Jewish people were saved. And because God took us as a people and overcame the evil Pharaoh whose decree was to kill all the firstborn, we, of course, give back to God, or at least we redeem our firstborn with the Kohanim as a matter of practice in the Jewish community, to say how grateful we are that God saved our firstborn children, to say how grateful we are that God took us as a people. The Talmudic discussion will focus on whether or not the priest is the one to say the ultimate blessing of Shehechianu at a Pidyon Haben, a redemption of the firstborn, or whether it is a father, whether it is a parent, whether the home is the essential place for bringing life to the Jewish people, or whether it is the temple precinct. Of course, the temple being no longer, the home is our focus. But the Gemara already knew that this debate would rage and sets the home as the eternal place of learning and shaping Jewish hearts and minds. Here's how the Talmudic tractate ends. The Gemara discusses another case concerning the order of blessings in the Pidyon Haben, the redemption of the firstborn of Jewish children. Importance of children in our focus. Rabbi Simlai attended a redemption of the firstborn son, and the celebrants raised a dilemma before him with regard to the blessings. First, they noted that it is the obvious thing that the blessing over the redemption of the firstborn son, which is Asher Kitshanu Mitzvotav Tivanu, who commanded us over the redemption of the firstborn son, is certainly recited by the father of the son, as he is the one obligated to redeem his son. However, with regard to the second blessing, which is the Shehechianu, who brought us to life, who sustained us, and who brought us to this time, V'higianu lazman hazeh, does the priest recite the blessing, the Kohen present, or does the father of the son recite it? The Gemara explains the two sides of the dilemma. It can be suggested that the priest recites the blessing as he benefits from the 5 selah, the coins that the family pays. The blessing of Shehechianu is generally recited for someone who receives benefit, but there's a more theoretical benefit that the father, of course, received, that the parents received, that the family of Israel received. That is the notion of the freedom, the redemption, the symbolic nature that measure for measure, God does indeed do justice in the world. As Pharaoh wanted to kill our firstborn, we not only celebrate the firstborn, but say that it is a chance to sanctify their presence on earth, our having arrived to this moment, our having the ability to build the Jewish family. And so, in the end, the scholars said to him that the father of the son recites the 2 blessings over the redemption of the son and Shehechianu. The Gemara concludes in that sense. The Kad Avid Mitzvah, Lo Hava Bide, Ata Sha'el Be Midrasha, Amrulei, Avi Haben, Mivarech Shtayim. The father of the son blesses both. The Hilchata, and it ends with a definitive halacha, not so common in Talmudic literature, even though you might think there are many legal decisions being made. Oftentimes there are hava aminas, there are positions that are debated by the rabbis, but not actual halachas determined entirely as a way of practice. But here, the halacha is avi haben mivarech shtayim, that the father of the child blesses both of those, that who redeems our firstborn, and Shehechianu. Shehechianu for all of us, that we arrive to this time, that we have the chance to make a spiritual Pesach, one meaningful by way of expression of freedom and our commitment to Jewish history, and to recognize God's commitment to Am Yisrael. Hadran alach arvei Pesachim v'slita la Masekhet Pesachim. You may wish to rise for the prayers for the SIYYUM Kaddish, which I will state now, or you can from your place join me just the way you are. Hadrach alach Masekhet Pesachim v'hadrach alan Datan alach Masekhet Pesachim v'datan alan. Lo nitna shem minach Masekhet Pesachim v'lo titna siminan. Lo ba'alma hadin v'lo ba'alma da'ate. Yehi v'chatzon v'fanecha Adonai Eloheinu v'lei avoteinu. שתהי תורתך ומדנותנו בעולם הזה ותהי עמנו לעולם הבא. חנינה בר פאפה, רמי בר פאפה, נחמן בר פאפה, חי בר פאפה, אבא מרי בר פאפה, רפנה בר פאפה, רחיש בר פאפה, סורחה בר פאפה, עדה בר פאפה, דרו בר פאפה. הרב נדון אלוהים ודברי תורתך בפינו ובפי עמך בישראל ונהיה אנחנו וצאצאינו וצאצאינו וצאצאי עמך בישראל. כולנו יודעי שמך ולומדי תורתך לשמה. אויביי תחכמני מצוותיך כי לעולם יהי לי ביטמי בחוקיך למען לא אבוש לעולם לא אשכח פקודיך כי בם חייתני ברוך אתה אדוני למדני חוקיך אמן 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 סלע ועד. מודים אנחנו לפניך אדוני אלוהינו ולאבותינו ששמת חלקנו מיושבי בית המדרש ולא שמת חלקנו מיושבי קרנות שאנו משכימים והם משכימים. אנו משכימים לדברי תורה והם משכימים לדברים בטלים. אנו עמלים והם עמלים, אנו עמלים ומקבלים שכר והם עמלים ואינם מקבלים שכר. אנו רצים והם רצים, אנו רצים לחיי עולם הבא והם רצים לבאר שחר. שנאמר ואתה אלוהים תורידם לבאר שחר. אנשי דמים ומרמה לא יחצו ימיהם ואני אבטח בך כי רצון לבניך אדוני אלוהי. כשם שעזרתני לסיים מסכת פסחים כן תעזרני להתחיל מסכתות וספרים אחרים ולסיימם, ולמור וללמד לשמור ולעשות ולקיים את כל דברי תלמוד תורתך באהבה, וזכות כל התנאים והאמוראים ותלמידי חכמים יעמוד לי ולזרעי שלא תמוש התורה מפי ומפי זרעי וזרע זרעי עד עולם, ויתקיים בי והתהלכך תנחה אותה ושוך בך תשמור עליך והקיצות ההיא תשיחך כי וירבו ימיך ויוסיפו לך שנות חיים אורך ימים בימינה בשמאלה אושר וכבוד אדוני עוז לעמו ייתן אדוני יברך את עמו בשלום. I'll share the screen for those who want to join in the Kaddish for the SIYYUM. יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה, יאמר דהו עתיד להתחדתה, ולחיה מתיה, ולעסקה לחיי עלמא, ולמבנה קרתא דירושלים, ולשכלל היכלה בגבה, ולמקר פולחנה נוכרה מערה, ולעטבה פולחנה דשמיא לאתרי, וימליך קודשא בריחו ומלכותי ויקרא בחייכון וביומכון ובחיי לכל בית ישראל בעגלה ובזמן קריב ואמרו אמן. יהי שמי רבה ורח לעולם ומעלה יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא יתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי וקודשא בריחו לעילה וכל ברכתה ושירתה ושבחתה ונחמתה אמירה בימה ואמרו אמן. על ישראל ועל רבנן ועל תלמידי הון ועל כל תלמידי הון ועל כל מאן דעסקין ברייתא ואתרא הדין וכל אתר ואתר יהי להון ולכון שלמה רבה חינה וחיסתא ורחמים חיים אריכין זוני רוויחי ופורקנה מקודם ושביה וערה
אמן.
יהי שלמה רבנים שמיה חיים טובים עלינו ועל כל ישראל אמן. עושה שלום
ממש
יעשה שלום עלינו ועל ישראל
אמן.
Amen.
Yasher Koach.
Brouchim to you.